And Apple Podcasts, I was listed in Essentials. Well, actually, last I checked, I'm still am in Entrepreneurial Essentials, and there's only like 8 podcasts listed in that.
Yeah.
And then I was in the top 200, and then like the next day or two, it was in the top 100, and then whatever. Ever since I've been in, I've never dropped out of the top 200, but
Before we dive in, let me tell you about the book that started a podcasting revolution, Make Every Podcast Want You. It is not just a bestseller, it is a 2-time gold medalist, baby. This book is your ultimate guide to landing dream podcast interviews, building authority authentically, and making your voice the one they remember. If you've got a message and a mission, this is your mic drop moment. Grab your copy today in the link below and step into the spotlight that you were born for.
Welcome to the Communication Queens podcast for the visionary leaders, speakers, service providers, and podcasters who are looking to stand out sharing their story. I'm your host, Kimberly Spencer, former screenwriter turned master communications coach. On this podcast, I'll be coaching you on how to share your own transformation story so that you increase your visibility, influence, and income on podcast interviews. Let's get your voice heard. Sarah, welcome to Communication Queen. I know that you are the founder of Podcast Marketing Agency, and you are all things podcaster. You're a global top 200 podcaster with Frugalpreneur. You are such a badass, and you're hysterical and my favorite person to hang out with at podcast conventions.
well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. This will be fun.
Absolutely. So what do podcasters get wrong in their marketing?
I mean, I think it's that they feel like just sharing it on social media is all they need to do, or even like not even going that far. But really, the thing is, though, yes, you should share to social, but the chances that someone sharing to social is more for awareness. People likely aren't going to like click on it and then go listen. So it's more like for someone to see the repetition. But I think what I do is there's a variety of things, whether it's podcast ads, like in different podcast players, apps, and directories, because someone's already listening to a podcast in there. So there's like display ads, there's with certain kinds of ads, you can like record your own little trailer, so to speak, that plays at the beginning of someone else's podcast. So those types of things, they're more likely to actually click over and check out your podcast, but that's a paid method. But there's a lot of like free options as well. Like I definitely recommend submitting your podcast to like Apple Podcast promos. And of course, I did a session on that at Podcast Movement Evolutions because it's free. Why not? And there's no guarantee they'll feature your show, but why not submit it? There's different newsletters that are specifically about podcasts, or there's different, even like blogs, are finding a way. Let's say someone gave me this example. I don't know if it was you or who it was, but like a dental podcast. If you can find, I'm just using that as an example.
Perfect.
Like a blog about dentistry or the top 10 dental podcasts, which I don't even know if that's a thing, but I'm just using that as an example, like finding different blogs, newsletters, whatever, that either have to do with your topic or niche. And then even better, ones that are talking about podcasts in that niche, and try to find a way to get featured or, get on that list, so to speak. Let's see. Yeah, there's just so many different ways, or collaborations even, or like podcast swaps, podcast guesting, which I know you're obviously big
We're
on.
all pros on podcast guesting. And this is a podcast swap. To give you some context, like I just recorded my episode with Sarah yesterday for the Frugalpreneur. And then she's on like literally the day after. And then on Friday, she's coming into the podcast party for our VIPs and our Pitch Please competition, which is it's a play fest. It's not really a competition. I don't like competition. So like we get to see each other 3 times in a week, which is amazing.
It's better when it's in person.
True, because
And then you see each other like
together.
yeah, and then you see each other like 3 times a day at least. But yeah, and podcast guesting, like even if you have your own podcast, I recommend being a guest on other podcasts because obviously that audience is already listening to a podcast, so the chances that they'll click over to yours, so just finding these different ways, whether paid or free, to get your podcast out there in some sort of format that is more conducive to, that will reach podcast listeners versus just being on social media.
So what got you into podcasting? Did you set out to be in the top 200 of entrepreneurship podcasts, or were you like, I think I'm just going to do this thing and talk, and it sounds like fun and I get to meet cool people?
Yeah, well, it's actually kind of funny. So I, 19, was writing a book called Frugalpreneur, and I decided to launch a podcast to coincide with the book, also Frugalpreneur, but it was just going to be like a mini series, like 10 episodes to kind of coincide with the book as an extra like marketing avenue. But I got more leverage and traction with the podcast than the book, and I love the networking and the connections and even the friendships, and I've been doing it for like 5 years now. And so I can't say I started on accident, but I started with no intention for it to be like a whole thing. But yeah, and so now I'm like obsessed with the podcast industry. I subscribe to probably over 50 podcasts, and most of my friends at this point are what I call pod pals or pod peeps, pod squad. There's so many different names. I just love the community, the industry, all of it.
Yeah, I found the community when we launched our agency, and then in 2023 when I went to Podcast Movement, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is one of the most inclusive, open, communicative industries that is just it's so welcoming, it's so supportive." And yeah, there's some like undercurrents sometimes, just like with every industry of people who are more in competition, but for the most part, it's really, really supportive and it's collaborative. And I think that
Hmm.
that's why, like, I truly believe that podcasters, whether you are just guesting on a bunch of shows or you have your own and your own brand, that voice that you're giving to yourself, to your businesses is going to be the voice of the future. Because I mean, currently we have clickbait social media 1.7 seconds compared to long form dialogue and content. And, now with AI emerging with more audio, like we're going to be able to, it's going to be observing how we communicate. And I think podcasters can hopefully bring hope and consciousness to AI in the fact that it's not trigger happy. It's a dialogue. It's open to exploration and curiosity.
Yeah, that makes me think. I just hope that, and I'm sure some people will do this, create podcasts that are AI. But I hope it doesn't become like, I wouldn't even say it'd be the norm, but I hope it doesn't. I hope that doesn't take off because that would be super annoying.
I mean, I think there's something to like energy. Like we saw when AI came out that, suddenly there's this huge influx of like, oh, I get to do all my copy for me. And then after a while, you're like, I've heard the word delve and a tapestry of ideas like way too often.
Well, that's so
Too many
funny.
emojis.
Sarah Losi, you
Hmm.
know her. Well, of course you do. Yeah, because she's also in Austin. It's so funny because I'm always like, yesterday I was asking if you knew Liz Wilcox, and it's like, duh, we all had dinner together. It's like I can't keep it straight. Who knows who? But anyway, she actually recently posted something about, I think it was on Threads or something. Like, does anyone actually use the word delve? So I thought it
I
was funny that you brought that up.
can definitely say I used delve like in 11th and 12th grade for my thesis papers and research papers, but that was only because I wanted to use some other word and was flipping through a thesaurus.
Yeah, and I think I commented on her post and I was like, well, let's delve further into this or something.
So you have scaled your podcast to such an immense status with the Frugalpreneur. What were your best marketing tactics that you used? And more importantly, like what I'm interested in is like, what was your energy behind it? Like, what were you thinking as you were just doing these things? Was it just like, I'm going to fuck around and find out?
I mean, I was never like really trying to get in the top one. At one point I was in the top 100, but I think it is top 200 now. But anyway, it wasn't like something I was trying to do. It was kind of out of nowhere because I check my analytics every day. And there was one day, and this was like, I don't know, maybe a year or something ago. And I noticed a rapid increase in downloads just out of nowhere. And when you guest on other shows, you might see an increase or when you release a new episode, whatever. But it was more than usual. And so I was telling some podcast friends, pod pals, whatever, about it. And I was like, I don't understand what happened or where it's coming from. And they actually looked into it and noticed I was in like in Apple Podcasts, I was listed in the essentials. Well, actually, last I checked, I'm still am in entrepreneurial essentials. And there's only like 8 podcasts listed in that.
Yeah.
And then I was in the top 200. And then like the next day or two, it was in the top 100. And then whatever. Ever since I've been in, I've never dropped out of the top 200, but to stay in the top 100 is kind of difficult. But anyway, and to this day, I still don't know for sure what happened, but my guess is because I did submit for the Apple Podcast promo, but this was months prior. And the thing about it is they don't ever tell you if they actually picked you or not, which is really dumb. You'd think they'd want you to know, but anyway. So that's my guess, especially since I'm in the essentials. Like, yeah, that's my best guess. So, and then once you're actually in there, I mean, because now more people are seeing your show, because they only, in any given category, at least in Apple, they only show like the top 200 as far as like listings. Otherwise, you pretty much have to search for something to find a given podcast or see it recommended because you listen to some other podcast. So to be able, and I don't know how often people actually go in the charts to look for that. And are they going to pick someone that's closer to like, whatever.
Yeah.
But still, it's, and I think especially with being in the essentials, that's probably even more relevant is just people constantly seeing that cover art and getting more and more listeners that way.
And I know you said like one of the things in your checklist, which I highly recommend everyone go and download from her website, podcastguest.agency. It's a great checklist. One of the essentials is that cover art that pops. And what
Oh,
really defines cover art that pops?
oh, you're talking about the audit checklist
That
on,
audit.
yeah, podcastmarketing.agency. So cover art that pops, I recommend colors that stand out. Well, usually, ideally one solid color, but not, something that kind of stands. See, the color on my cover art, the background color is just like a bluish, navy bluish, but the image itself is like the piggy bank, which is bright pink, but something kind of, basic. Don't have a whole lot of different things going on. One central thing. And your title, I think your title has something to do with it as well. Now, my title kind of goes against the typical recommendation because it's a made up word. Most people are not going to be searching frugalpreneur unless they're specifically searching for my show. But if they're searching for frugal entrepreneurship or, whatever. And that's why I have a tagline also that says building a business on a bootstrap budget, so that for SEO, but also for if someone can't figure out that frugalpreneur means frugal entrepreneur. I mean, if you can pick something cute and catchy like that works, then that's good. Like your title, Communication Queens, it's pretty clear that it's about communication. And so the title I think is important. A cute or funny even cover art that really stands out and pops, like visually, like colorful. Something that basically what you want to keep in mind is like if you're scrolling through a podcast app, what cover would like get you to stop the scroll or catch your attention?
We found Communication Queen when we launched it. It just like it hit number 55 in marketing and Apple Podcasts.
Oh, okay. So you've been in the top 100 too.
For a hot second. Yeah, I think we
Okay.
slipped and fell from grace. Now we're in the top 100 for India and Russia, though.
Okay. Well, that's important too. Those are big
So,
countries.
I mean, they are. It's a gigantic country with a huge population. So anyway, I'm so grateful. And it's looking at, what is that thing that pops? And we found that like that bright pink of the Communication Queen podcast, it really does pop. Crown Yourself has had a larger and longer runway to being in the top 2%. And, I think we've changed our cover art a few times. We also did a whole rebrand back in 2021, 2021, back from calling it The Princess and the Bee, which is all about the bees on becoming the queen of your life, to like, I was just like, why not name it after my company? So that was a big, like, no brainer, duh moment for me, where I was like, why I'm just going to keep everything very simple and have it be a very coherent brand, and understanding that cohesiveness of the brand. And that was why when we split and created the agency, we created a whole separate brand. It's a whole vibe. It's like bright. It's neon. It's colorful. It's different than the Crown Yourself brand. And I wanted it to be like the golden shadow of the Crown Yourself brand.
So kind of on that topic, it would be kind of awesome to get your point of view on if okay, so Frugalpreneur, it's my podcast, and I have no intention of ever stopping it or any of this stuff. I've contemplated, changing the name or the cover art or whatever or expanding the name to focus on podcasting. But I'm like, no. Anyone I've talked to, they're like, no. So I've thought about, well, maybe launching a second podcast about podcasting, because basically Frugalpreneur, sorry, I don't want to turn this into a coaching session, but
Oh, I love it. Let's
okay.
do it.
Because Frugalpreneur, there isn't a direct correlation to my podcast marketing agency.
You got a lot of big podcasters on your show. And I think that can be a great gateway drug to your podcast agency, versus having it be like having to start a whole podcast around that. I don't think that that's entirely necessary, based on the fact that you can always go back, because relationships track no matter what industry you're in or what business you are. I mean, I've jumped industries 4 times, and I've had clients who were Pilates clients become coaching clients. I've had coaching clients become our communication queen clients. I've had my network from Hollywood come in to work with me as both a Pilates instructor and as a coach. So it all, like, people like doing business with people that they know, like, and trust. And that's the beautiful thing about having a podcast, is that it does build a relationship. And so you have the street cred of having that relationship. Also have the credibility of saying, you have a podcast that's a global top 200 show. It was even global top 100. And so there's something you're doing right when it comes to marketing your show, because it is getting out there on a high level.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also I was thinking of creating maybe a separate podcast, but just as a mini series. So it's not like, because we kind of talked about that yesterday in general. More, it's not an ongoing podcast, but maybe I could create like a 10-part one-time, podcast for my agency on different like podcast marketing tips or something, so that at least it's out there. And if people find it, then it'll be a direct,
Yeah, it directly attracts. And like, that's one of the things that when we had Cliff Ravenscraft on the show, he shared that about how one of his podcasts he did was just a simple series, and 10-part series. It still is bringing people into his mastermind years later.
Yeah.
And that's the power of the podcast, is that as long as you're paying for your hosting, which is like, my husband still pays for his hosting. He hasn't done his podcast in like 4 years. But he's had some really extraordinary guests, like Mark Pellegrino from all the movies. And I think he had Jennifer Hale on, who's like the queen of voice acting. Like, he's had some really extraordinary guests. So he's just letting the podcast kind of live on for right now. And he may resume it, he may not. But it's free. For the most part, what I've seen is, of those 90% of podcasts that are no longer technically active because they're not producing every 90 days, still a majority of them are consistently paying for their service to have the show up and available. I have a friend of mine. She hit new and noteworthy. And she hit that on the chart. She had some rock star, like celebrity style influencer guests on her show. She did 8 episodes, didn't produce anymore, and it still lives on, and it still generates and brings in people into her branding business, even though her branding business is not something active. It's all automated.
Before we get to the rest of the juiciness inside of this episode, I want you to imagine this. You open your inbox and bam, a fresh list of podcasts looking for someone just like you. No cold pitches, no chasing, just aligned visibility served on a silver platter like only royals receive. That's what you get with podcastguest.com. So if you're ready to magnetize opportunities, effortlessly attract aligned audiences, and finally speak your truth on stages that convert, then go sign up now and claim your free profile. Now let's get back to the episode.
So with Frugalpreneur top 1 and 200, it never did get a new and noteworthy. But of course, back when I launched that podcast, I didn't know. I mean, that was 5 years ago. I didn't know. I don't think I even knew what that was. But now I do. And maybe I could kind of research and figure out the best ways to kind of like, anyway. So if I do launch this like 10-part or however many part mini podcast for my agency, I could attempt to get that in new and noteworthy. Yeah. That'll
Yeah.
be my trial run.
Yeah. And then also if you figure out and hack that system, then that's something that you can also advertise as a part of your services.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So many good ideas.
We're just going to keep generating them. Like, this is the power of the podcast. It can be a mastermind, it could be a coaching session, it could be an interview.
It can be an oh yeah.
Oh yeah, experience. It just hits all your buttons in all the right places.
It's an inside joke.
It is an inside joke, and I have no idea how it got started, but it cracks Sarah and I up every time. And that's
I
why I say
mean,
when we get
I
together,
want
you see us in person, we are ridiculous.
well, I want to say, I mean, it was at a podcast conference and I think it was at one of the parties, one of the dance parties. But
Probably.
why we started saying it or how it started, I don't know.
It's a
But yeah.
mystery. But I don't think it's a mystery that needs to be solved.
Unsolved mysteries.
Turn it into a podcast. What has the Frugalpreneur as a brand and as a podcast done for you as a business owner?
So one of the things that I like about podcasting is the ability to have, bigger name people on your show. Like if you didn't have a podcast and you wanted to speak to, let's say, JLD or John Lee Dumas or Pat Flynn or Jordan Harbinger or whoever, these are all big podcasters.
John Lee Dumas is the podcaster for Entrepreneurs on Fire. Just to
Flynn.
give some context.
Yeah, and Pat Flynn is Smart Passive Income. And
Yep.
Anyway, so if you were to like try to reach out to them or contact them and be like, hey, can I have 30 minutes of your time? You're either not going to get a response or it's going to be a no. But if you have a podcast and you're like, hey, would you like to come on my podcast to talk about, the new book that that's another thing. Side tangent. If you want to get like a big name person on your show, that's typically maybe hard to get. Pay attention to when, if they do write books, pay attention to when their next book is coming out because they're much more likely, because they do these podcast book tour thingies and they're much more likely to come on, smaller shows during a book tour or a podcast tour than any other time. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's like what I think the example that I gave on your show with Brendan Burchard and Tony Robbins.
Yes.
And Tony Robbins stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for like 16 extra weeks because he was doing like every podcast with over 1,000 down. Like he was doing so many podcasts. And
Man,
there
I
were a
wish
couple podcasters I knew that had like 10,000 downloads. Like they had small numbers, and he still did their show.
man, I'll keep that in
That's a
mind for
great
his
hack.
next book.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so having a podcast, I think, the ability to connect with bigger name people and maybe network or there have been times where like I'll be on someone's show or vice versa and they happen to know or are an acquaintance of so and so. And so they they do an intro for you to them. And then that's how they are willing to come on. And so I think that's one thing with the podcast that I've really enjoyed. And then just it's propelling me into the whole podcast space and business and just the speaking sessions, now the agency, I guess in my own personal life, just like I don't know, it makes you feel good like to connect with these people and have these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your favorite question to ask?
Now that's a good question. My favorite question to ask on a podcast episode, because I don't usually normally ask the same questions to different people. I just kind of go with the flow. I mean, I guess hearing about like if I'm interviewing a very successful, well-known entrepreneur or podcaster, having them talk about their failures leading up to that, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, because there's so much magic when you can talk about the failure. And when people are vulnerable enough to talk about the failure, because I've
talked with some really great podcasters and had some really great CEOs and masterminds. And I'm like, these people are super successful, but they don't share their failures. And that's because they're not sharing
Mm,
vulnerability. There's courage vibration is not actually resonating. And so people are kind of like, I've actually had podcasters say that sometimes super, super, super successful CEOs were actually the worst guests because they had no idea how to tell a story because they didn't want to
mm.
go there vulnerably and share about a failure for fear of
Yeah,
how to make them look.
I think being able to share your whole story and the vulnerability is a good thing and helps you connect and relate better with the host and the listeners. I think a lot of times when it comes to top entrepreneurs or top celebrities or whoever, we don't usually know the backstory or all the years and failures that it took to get them to the point that we see now. So to hear about kind of that process is, um, oh, here's an example. I had a guest on my podcast. This is to this day, I think, still one of my most popular episodes. And he's originally from somewhere in Africa, came to America with only $100 and bootstrapped. Basically, I would call it like a staircase situation
Mhm.
where, like, okay, he started with $100, and I forget what the first thing he did was, but then once he got to $2,000 from whatever that thing was, he bought a camera, did photography. Then when he had, $10,000 and whatever, he just kinda kept going and going higher up as
Mhm.
he made more money, then he invested in something else with that money to then. Anyway, so he now has like 3 multimillion-dollar software companies, but bootstrapped it all the way from $100. So I think stories like that of like, okay, yeah, if you were to see him now and not know his backstory, it's like, okay, well, did he come into that money? Did he inherit it? Like, what's the deal? But to learn that whole backstory and how he kind of, I'll call it stair stepping, I don't know, his way, bootstrapped,
Mhm.
it's just it makes you realize that you can do it too.
So you know what I'm going to ask you, right?
Are you gonna ask, like, how what my stair step process?
What's your favorite failure?
My
That,
favorite
that
failure.
yeah, your favorite failure business wise.
Okay. So, I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with shiny object syndrome.
No. Ooh, shiny.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, when I was starting out in 2008 with, trying to have an online business, I tried this, that, and the other thing, blogging, affiliate marketing, drop shipping, print on demand, all these different things. And all that stuff basically were failures, but it's what prompted me to write the book, Frugalpreneur, which then led into the podcast, which then has now led into all these other things. And so I guess it's like, even though I had multiple online business failures, and honestly, they probably wouldn't fail if I stuck with them. The issue was I kept getting shiny object syndrome and would jump. I would get bored really quick with one thing and then
Mhm.
jump to the next thing. And so, but, those failures ended up leading to a book and a podcast and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and ultimately your calling because your podcast you've had for 5 years,
Mhm.
and I
Yeah.
think it's so common for entrepreneurs to have that shiny object syndrome in the beginning, and you're trying everything and you're seeing what's going to work, you're seeing what's it's the spaghetti against a wall sort of methodology. But when you start to really hone in with clarity and get really clear, and then I think also to prevent entrepreneurs from having that shiny object syndrome, it's building in systems. And it's having a
Mm.
system and commitment, and systems can be team, it can be support, it can be hiring someone like you to do that, like the podcast marketing. Like it's building in systems so that you can go off and be that visionary leader that you are. And then your business still keeps going without you because the visionaries just get bored every 5 years. I've just seen that to be a common trait. And I say this as a visionary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the thing with podcasting is because even when I started my podcast, I still was doing this, that, and the other thing. But now I feel like for the first time in my whole entrepreneurial career since like 2008 is when I kind of started, I would say like I feel more the most like the clarity and in line and like know exactly what I want to do. Yeah, because even like And we were talking yesterday how initially I was like, well, I could do like a podcast production agency. But I was like, but because I was producing and still produce my own show, which hopefully I will pass that off here in a little bit. But, um, so I was like, well, why not get paid to do it for other people? But I don't even like editing my own show. So I never ended up really getting it off the ground. Like, I never really promoted it because I didn't really want to do it, but I just didn't know what else. Because
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to be in the podcast space, but I was like, okay, well, if I'm not a podcast production agency, what else can I do? Podcast software? Well, I don't know how to make software. But yeah, I realized, okay, marketing is the part that I like. Not like social media marketing, but like podcast specific type of marketing. And a lot of podcast production agencies don't really offer that. And so, yeah, so
Yeah.
that's my path now.
Yeah. And I love it. I mean, it's like when it's allowing for each of those stepping stones to be the ones that guide you. What was,
Mhm.
because Frugalpreneur is so based on being budget conscious and being aware, what was the biggest like financial challenge that you faced as a business owner?
I guess I'll just go into this. I would say so. When I was married, which I've been divorced now for like a year. I would say my biggest struggle was having to always like justify to my ex any expenses that were business related, even as small as they might be. So, and I am naturally a frugalpreneur or frugal, I guess. It's kind of how I was raised and whatever. So I was already of that mindset, using as much free software as I could or affordable or keeping business expenses, at least software expenses, well under 100 a month, and even creating like a budget for it and all this stuff. But still, even with all of that, would get pushback or whatever with any kind of business expense, even if it was $5. So I would say, I don't know if this counts, but I would say that was my biggest hurdle.
It totally counts. I had that in my e-commerce company with my partner to where I
Okay.
couldn't make a decision financially for anything, not even like buying a pen or like
Mm.
office supplies as on company card. Like that
Fear of
without
like,
without it actually being approved. And I was like,
uh-huh.
this doesn't make sense, nor does this feel like there is trust. And I
Mm.
think when it comes to money, and that's one of the things I love about my husband so much is like, I remember when we were broke as a joke and I come in and I'm like, I'm 8 months pregnant and I found a coach that I was like, I think I need to work with her. And it was less for the coaching because she actually like stopped being in business after a while, but it was more for the community that I needed because I was
Mhm.
like, I'm going from like entrepreneur to being like a mompreneur, juggling a business and a baby. And I'm like, I need support, like just of women around me, just to kind of energy. And he was like, well, I know you're going to get it. So it's like, why are you asking me? And I said, oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
and
That
he just trusts, like, he always has
Mhm.
trusted that I can make it back.
Yeah, and that's good, and I think that's what you need is a partner, spouse, whatever, that is totally supportive and puts and trust that you know what you're doing with your money and like ROI and all this stuff. And so that was, I guess, kind of a big issue was just feeling maybe guilty.
So, given that you're such a frugalpreneur, what is the best money that you've ever spent for your podcast and on your podcast continuously? What is the best money that you're like, yes, no matter what, if you're going to have a podcast or if you want to be a professional guest and like go on a lot of shows, this is what you want to like drop some serious change on because you will get an ROI, whether it's sound quality or tech or whatever it is.
I mean, I would say first and foremost would be a mic, which you can get, I have a USB mic. It's a Samsung Q2U. It's like, I don't know, $80 probably. So from a like technical or equipment perspective, I would say that. From, let's see. I mean, there's plenty of different software programs, but I don't know. I would say invest in podcast conferences. Not,
Mm.
I mean, yes, the education side of it, but I think even the networking side, even more so.
And even if you don't have your own podcast, when you go in with a generous heart and you can refer people to podcasters, you can like you mentioned, Liz Wilcox, who
Hmm.
on your show, she doesn't have a podcast, but is going to these podcast conventions and meeting a ton of podcasters and getting on their shows. And it's
Hmm.
a great way to build relationships. I will say it's one of the best ways that we've done for growing our business because I just meet so many amazing, awesome, cool podcasters. And it's far better than some like sad pitch email that's, the amorphous unknown face that you don't know versus like, when you get our pitch emails, but we won't say what our code word is.
You can probably guess it at this point if you're paying attention.
And that's the beauty, though. It comes from relationships and building relationships. And like you said, like you've built an epic pod squad of like some amazing podcasters that you can go on their shows whenever you're promoting something. Like it builds relationship. And I think that that's one of my favorite parts about this interview today is we got to show our weird, awesome friendship. Oh yeah. And like that's the power, like the power of the podcast can be exponential when you focus on seeing what you can give to someone, not what you can get from someone.
Yeah, that's a good point. And any kind of collaborations and yeah, and I like you said earlier, the podcast industry, people in the podcast industry are much more about collaboration than competition.
I always love to ask to wrap this up, what did you love about our conversation?
Oh, I love you ask really good questions, some questions that I've never been asked before. I love how the energy and the flow, and obviously we get along well and have a good time.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the Communication Queen podcast. Where can we find you? How can we work with you if we have a podcast and want to start marketing it and getting it in all the places and growing it to that sacred top 200 space?
Yeah, so my site is podcastmarketing.agency. Very SEO. That's the name of my podcast marketing agency is Podcast Marketing Agency. And the 15-point audit checklist thing that we had kind of talked about earlier, you can get that on the homepage. And then if you want to check out the podcast, just search Frugalpreneur and wherever you listen to your podcast.
Amazing. As always, Communication Queens, stand out and let your voice be heard.
Queen, if what you just heard stirred something in you, if you are imagining how your voice, your story, your genius could be positioned with the same clarity and magnetism, then it's time. Book your visibility consultation with me today. I will guide you personally through a 7-step Communication Queen strategy, personalized connections to podcasts that need your voice, and an implementation plan that makes you unignorable. But this isn't for everyone. It's for the visionary who is ready to be seen. If that is you, click the link in the description to book your visibility consultation now.
Thank you so much for listening. If you love this episode, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. For more tips on guest podcasting, storytelling, and communication strategies, follow us on social media at Communication Queens Agency and visit us at communicationqueens.com. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And in the meantime, remember, your story has the power to save one life. Let your story and your voice be heard.